Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
Greetings, and thank you for joining me, Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. You can listen to us live on air or online at iHeartRadio, Odyssey, TuneIn app, smart speakers, nccradio.org, and the WHPC app so that you can listen to all the award-winning shows on this award-winning station. And podcasts are also available in case you miss a show or want your friends to hear one on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spreaker. Herbally Yours continues to bring you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. Today, we are so happy to have as our guest Dr. John Poothullill. He's a medical doctor who has practiced medicine as a pediatrician and allergist for more than 30 years. He holds certifications from the American Board of Pediatrics, the American Board of Allergy and Immunology, and the Canadian Board of Pediatrics. As a patient advocate, Dr. John strives to empower people with new scientific insights and complementary approaches to preventing obesity, reversing type 2 diabetes, and surviving cancer. Dr. John is a prolific author and has beautiful books available, including Eat, Chew, Live, and Diabetes, the Real Cause and the Right Cure. And you can see all the books and get in touch with Dr. John at drjohnonhealth.com. And we will have a live link to that as well. So thank you so much, Dr. John, for being our guest today.
I thank you, Dr. Ellen, and I thank our visitors and listeners.
Let's go back in time to when you were a little boy. What made you want to become a doctor, or did it happen at that point or some other point in your life?
Even from childhood, I was just curious about how things work. And that curiosity, it is not enough to know what is happening, but how it is happening. That encouraged me to look into science, such as physics, simple motion. You sit down and you get up. What? Or you sleep. How do you get up? You're asleep. What makes your brain think it is time to get up? How does the brain know how long you should sleep? And the more importantly, you cannot predict when you are going to be hungry next. How can the brain know, okay, it is time that you need some food? That timing, it is not a periodic, exactly every 4 minutes, every 4 hours or 6 hours. It is variable. Even more important, when you start eating, you don't always eat the same volume of food to feel satisfaction. How did this happen? How does it happen? That curiosity led me to chemistry, science, and eventually medical school. And I'm happy that I can still keep on thinking, even though I'm retired. In fact, that gave me more time to think and question what is going on and the marvelous way that nature has created and empowered us to deal with many of these life conditions, life situations on our own, if only we can take time to understand what is going on in the body.
What you just described there must have led you to write several of your books, certainly Eat, Chew, Live. What made you come up with that title?
Again, the primary thing that I see when I started thinking about these things, each time I'm in a restaurant, I'll start observing how people eat. Sometimes I see obese people eating very slow, but eating large amounts, whereas lean people eating fast, but eating very small amounts. So again, my question was, how can these two people be satisfied with such different amounts of food intake. And more importantly, what I observed was the lack of chewing. If you chew a food, it takes longer to eat and less amount to satisfy yourself. Now think about it. From nature, is there any natural food material that adult humans can get nutrients from without chewing? Only thing I can come up with is honey, but honey is not a common food that we eat. So why did nature create humans where you have to chew? Chewing releases the nutrients into the mouth, the point of entry of nutrients in the body. By the way, human body needs over 100 different nutrients. You cannot get all of them from one food group or one meal. That is why you have multiple episodes of eating during the day. And eating is one of the greatest enjoyments a human being can enjoy multiple times a day, barring none else. So what is happening nowadays is people are so much in a hurry. They don't take time to enjoy what they can, slowing down, chewing the food that they eat multiple times a day. That is one of the biggest problems that leads to increased food intake and later obesity and lifestyle conditions such as type 2 diabetes and promotion of cancer.
So I think almost every grandmother everywhere, regardless of their traditions, would agree with you, because all grandmothers always tell everyone, slow down and chew your food.
Yes, I absolutely agree. If only we listened and we taught our daughters and sons to sit down. But imagine a school teacher or an office worker in a hurry to get the children to school and get herself or himself ready to go to work. And we have to go a long distance when you're visiting somebody and tell the children, we don't have time to stop. You better eat. And if you finish this, I'll give you the dessert. And the child himself or herself has so many social activities, sports. The time allocated for eating is at random, and that destroys the natural connections and control mechanisms.
Well, there's a term that's used quite a bit now. And also, I notice that your teachings really span, because you are so well versed and educated in what we will call conventional medicine. You know, you're actually part of many medical societies, such as the American Board of Pediatricians. So we know you're fully knowledgeable in what we'll call conventional medicine treatment. But you're also knowledgeable in what I call traditional medicine. And traditional medicine is based on ancient techniques that have been around for thousands of years and that actually look at what is the cause. Because you often said already that you're thinking about what causes it. So in something like diabetes, or what we hear a lot about now, it's even in the news, something called insulin resistance. You have been talking about for years. What is insulin resistance, and what is the link to type 2 diabetes that so many people suffer from?
Dr. Ellen, that is an excellent question. That is what I have been trying to explain to people for the last 20 to 25 years. First, let us look at what is insulin. Insulin is one of 50 hormones released in the body. And what insulin does is, well, let me give you this example. When your doorbell rings, you know there is somebody outside. Otherwise, if the person can stand there, if there is no way to inform you, that gives you the opportunity either to go to the door, open the door, find who he is, or if you have one of these new gadgets, you will know who is waiting for you. Every cell in the body can use glucose to produce energy. It's the fuel. However, when glucose is outside the cell, there is no doorbell for glucose to ring to let the cell know it is outside. That is the job of insulin. So after food is digested, when blood glucose level goes up, the pancreas releases insulin to go with glucose so that the insulin can ring the doorbell to let the cell know. The cell can then send in a transport wagon to load up glucose molecules to bring them inside. Now imagine a child who does not have insulin in the body because the pancreas is not functioning. Glucose accumulates in the blood, but cells starve inside because insulin does not get into the cell, it only rings the doorbell. So this is what used to happen in type 1 diabetes until insulin was discovered. Those children without insulin will die by about age 10. Now, with insulin, they live into adult age. Now, Dr. Elliot Jocelyn in Boston treated the maximum number of type 1 diabetics, and he was so pleased with the success of using insulin in saving these children's lives. When his adult relative came with high blood sugar, he thought it was the same disease and injected her with insulin. And sure enough, her blood sugar went down. And he was convinced it is the same disease happening at a later age, and he called it adult onset diabetes. What Dr. Jocelyn could not do was measure the level of insulin in an adult at the time of diagnosis of diabetes. When that test came later on, to the surprise of many endocrinologists, it was found that adults at the time of diagnosis has normal or even elevated level of insulin in the body. That created a problem. By that time, the pharmaceutical companies were producing insulin in the lab, and everybody was using insulin. Adult diabetic patients' number was increasing, and endocrinologists had to explain some way the rationale of using insulin. So they came up with a theory, just a hypothesis, that perhaps cells in the body are resisting insulin, and that later became known as the insulin resistance theory. But the most amazing factor is there are 200 different types of cell in the body, but endocrinologists picked only 3, the fat, the liver, and muscle, only 3 out of 200 becoming resistant. Why? Because that's the best way for them to explain the laboratory findings. In other words, the concept of insulin resistance is primarily based on explanations rather than actual evidence.
Oh, I never heard that before. That is really, really interesting, that story of the historic development of the term insulin resistance. Let me reintroduce you, Dr. John, to our audience. And Herbally Yours brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. And you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Thanks for listening, and you can also visit our archives. So today we have as our guest Dr. John Poothullill, medical doctor, who is a pediatrician and allergist for more than 30 years and holds certifications from the American Board of Pediatrics, the American Board of Allergy and Immunology, and the Canadian Board of Pediatrics. You can find all these books he wrote, which are many, including Eat, Chew, Live, and Diabetes, The Real Cause and the Right Cure, at Dr. John, that's Dr. John, on health.com. And there will be a live link if you visit our archives. So, Dr. John, thank you so much for being our guest today. I really enjoyed that explanation, and I love doing radio shows. I've been doing this show since 1990 and many shows before that, so it's been a minute. And I actually have never heard that description of insulin resistance. That was really enlightening, and thank you for it. Nonetheless, there's a big difference, as you began to discuss, between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes, I do not think can be completely dealt with just with dietary and lifestyle changes. But one thing people don't know, and you probably do, of the people who say they have diabetes, what is the percentage of people who have that genetic type 1 that usually comes out during childhood and referred to as juvenile or type 1 versus type 2 adult onset? Because people don't realize almost everyone has the second type.
Yes, the type 1 diabetes is only 15%, whereas 85% of adult people with diabetes of type 2, they have normal levels of insulin, but yet they have high blood glucose level. To put it in simple terms, in type 1 diabetes, it is a problem of usage of available glucose. That means a child without insulin cannot use glucose to survive, and therefore they need insulin for survival. Whereas type 2, in my opinion, is oversupply. There's too much glucose coming into the body cannot use, but the endocrinologists blame the cells for not using. It is as if when you are already full after a nice meal, I bring you more food. If you don't eat what I bring, I call you are resisting feeding. That is exactly what the endocrinologists are trying to do. You know, there is no test to measure the degree of insulin resistance directly. It is all calculated. Why? If there is something known as insulin resistance, why can't we have a test? 80 years we have been dealing with this without a test or a mechanism. What is blocking the glucose from entering the cell if a cell is resistant? Even more importantly, if you are resistant to an antibiotic, will the doctor give you that antibiotic on a routine basis? No. Yet here, you are a diabetic because you are resistant to insulin. And what does the doctor give you as a prescription? Insulin. How does that make sense?
That's a really, really good point. So I know that you've written many books. In fact, you have even a newer book out called Your Health Risk: How to Navigate Information Chaos to Prevent Lifestyle Diseases. So here we're getting to the crux of the matter, in that actually type 2 diabetes, people can reverse it and cure it because it is a lifestyle disease rather than a genetic issue.
Absolutely. Just to give you an example, 85% of type 2 diabetic people in this country, in the Western world, are obese. But do you know 60% of type 2 diabetics in India and China are either normal weight or marginally overweight? So if obesity is the primary reason why non-obese people develop diabetics, the conventional medicine has no explanation. And
what's your explanation, Dr. John?
My explanation is we are all born with a fixed amount of fat storage capacity. After each meal, any excess glucose has to be converted into fat for storage because the liver can hold only 120 grams of glucose. The rest will have to be stored as fat. When the fat stores are full, glucose stays in the blood. So it is not obesity or your classification based on a weight table or a BMI chart. It is how much actual fat storage capacity you inherit. This is why sometimes you see a person weighing 300 pounds and normal blood sugar. Sometimes a 300-pound person can have high blood sugar and diabetes, because it depends on whether the fat is stored outside the blood or not. Even if you are a lean person, all you have to do is take the example of a pregnant young woman. At the end of second trimester of pregnancy, she starts showing up with high blood sugar. Why? She inherited a fat storage capacity that has been filled up because all her friends are telling her, eat this, good for the complexion of the body, of the baby. Eat this, good for the nerve development, good for this, good for that. She eats and eats, fills up her fat storage capacity, her blood sugar start going up. And after delivery, when she loses weight, everything goes back to normal. If it is insulin resistance, how can it come and go just like that?
So that's a good point. So what are some techniques if people are having this problem that your books and you suggest that they follow?
Excellent question. This is what our audience need. All you have to do is look at the way our grandfathers and grandmothers consumed food. 100 years ago, the percentage of daily food energy one consumed was less than 35% from complex carbohydrates. Whereas now, with modern agricultural techniques, grains have become the majority provider of food energy from 50 to 70%. If we can cut down what you eat in the form of complex carbohydrates from grains to 1/2 of what you are eating now, I'm not saying that you have to eliminate them, but cut them into 1/2 of what you're doing within 8 weeks. You will see you can bring down your blood glucose level close to normal limits without having to use medication. Medications such as insulin, in my opinion, has no place to the routine treatment of type 2 diabetes because it hides blood glucose. It drives it away from blood, but it does not go out of the body. 50% of people, even when they keep A1C below 7, suffer from kidney damage, eventually needing dialysis. 25% type 2 diabetics on insulin will develop vision problems. 2.5% will have amputations, and 60% will have neurological symptoms such as neuritis. How can that happen if insulin is the correct treatment?
Right, which you're pointing out, and correctly so, I agree. It is not the correct treatment, but that it can be. I personally, in my many years of practice, which was over 54 years that I was in practice, I saw hundreds of type 2 diabetics completely not be diabetics anymore by following similar routines of what you're suggesting and the use of several different kinds of herbs that helped the body deal with, glucose and also activate enzymes to further break down the food. So it is something that can be reversed. Now, when you're talking about grains, there's a difference though, right? Like something like cake and cookies and a donut is different than a 1/2 cup of cooked organic brown rice, even though they're both grains.
Yes, they do. It all depends on the rate at which they are digested and absorbed, and also the quantity. Some people who are not used to rice, if they develop diabetes, they can change to a different grain or reduce and if they are not used to the taste, they reduce the quantity. So initially it will work. Eventually, if the body gets used to the new grain, then they have to be careful about the total quantity. So that is where the chewing comes in. Now, imagine this, a grain. Is it meant for humans? If so, we would have had the ability to pick up the grain and eat it and the ability to digest the chaff. We don't. Grains, in my opinion, were not primarily meant for humans.
Well, it came about later, of course, because originally people ate basically meat or also berries and grasses, things that just grew because there was no agriculture.
Exactly. The best example is to look at the Native Americans who were brought to the reservations in the year 1900. They had complete physical examination and type 2 diabetes was practically unknown. Now, if you look at the adults and Pima Indians in Arizona, 50% of them are either pre-diabetic or diabetic. Why? Native Americans in their natural habitat moved from one food source to another. They ate everything, meat, fish, tubers, fruits, vegetables, nuts. What they did not eat was cultivated grains because they never stayed in one place to cultivate them. Whereas in the reservation, that was their major source of food energy intake. And now they suffer for it.
Well, there's so many examples of that. I want to thank you so much for being our guest today, right here on Herbally Yours. What's the best way for people to find your books, Dr. John? And I think they're written in a style that is really easy to understand and follow.
Again, thanks to my publisher and editor, it is much more easy for people to understand. There may be some science, basic science involved in it, but I have my website and all these books are available on Amazon.
On Amazon.
Yes.
Yeah, that's always a good way to go. And you just look up Dr. John Poothullill. And I want to thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you, Dr. Allen, for having me, and I thank our audience. Please, all I'm asking is take charge of your body, your health. We all enjoy eating, but take time to enjoy what you eat.
Great advice. And I want to thank you, listeners, for tuning into Herbally Yours, produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, you can always email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamhi, and you can find me at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us again next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.